I came across a quote or statement which is so funny, and I like to read it back to you because only yesterday I saw it again, and this time I saved it. So the quote goes as follows. I'm autistic, which means everyone around me has a disorder that makes them say things they don't mean, not care about structure, fail to hyperfocus on singular important topics, have unreliable memories, drop weird hints, and creepily stare into my eyeballs.
Welcome to Played by Your Rules, the podcast for those tired of living by somebody else's script and ready to live and lead on their terms. I'm your host, Maggie Rombach, coach, speaker, and strategist. I'm here to spark a little rebel energy and leave you with a sense of possibility. Each episode, I'll talk to leaders, adventurers, experts, and changemakers who found their way. Some loud and bold, others quiet and intentional. You'll walk away with fresh insights, inspiration, and practical tools to chart your next chapter. If you're craving more freedom, flow, and fun, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another episode of Play It by Your Rules, hosted by Maggie Rombach. And I have another amazing guest today, Xenia. And, this podcast is all about writing your own rules. So instead of me introducing you, I'll give you straight the word to introduce yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Xenia, and my mission is that I'd like to change the way we think about work, leadership, and mental well-being. So what I'm doing is I'm a business psychologist and systemic consultant, and I develop frameworks such as neuroinclusion or mental well-being to make that more measurable, scalable, and that we take back control and create a world which suits everyone and every nervous system.
I love it. That's like a big mission vision. That's a
It
good
is.
starting point. So maybe can you just tell us a little bit more about you? So what brought you to that mission and why you're so passionate about this topic?
So I myself am a late diagnosed neurodivergent, but in my older life, the other life before that, because it is indeed a life-changing diagnosis, is that I've worked more than 15 years in the corporate world. I worked in HR and business functions. So I actually know a lot about how organizations are structured and the infrastructure behind culture. But also, I know what challenges lie ahead when we look into the future, when we see what's happening around us in times of AI or geopolitical uncertainty or generational differences, because Gen Z is hitting the workplace right now. And knowing all of that, when I got the chance to restructure my work life, because the last job I was in was at Sky, which I truly love. It was one of the most amazing places to be for a neurodivergent person like me, because I have ADHD, so autistic ADHD, and not one single day was the same. But after 4 years, we had restructures, which is often the case when you work in HR. And at that particular time, I thought, let's step out of the world that I know and choose to follow the path of my passion. That was also the time I was researching more around nervous system and how that connects to manifestation in a way. So neuroception, which is a terminology or term coined by Stephen Porges. I got into the research of that. And long story short, I started my business. I started coaching first because I had to find methods to cure myself from OCD. And I created, that was my first framework I created, my first method.
So just to jump
And
in
that's where it
here,
all started.
for
Yeah.
our listeners, OCD.
Yeah, so obsessive compulsion disorder, or as I like to call it, persistent hyperfixation disorder, which is the way more fitting term. So yeah, I had to find my own means and my own method. Lucky me, I came across the nervous system work, and that was the missing piece. And ever since, everything, it seems, what I structure or what I work on is always coming back to the nervous system. So that's now my baseline for social interaction, for healing trauma, for self-regulation, for co-regulation at work. You know, co-regulation to me is the future leadership skill, which every leader needs who wants to lead high performance teams. And yeah, I would say that's the common ground. That's what's the baseline of everything, and that's what surrounds all of the methods I create as of now.
Already so rich. I just pause you for a second because there's
Yeah.
so many levels where I want to jump in, but I wanted to recognize two things here because it's actually really deep what you just said. So first of all, I think, and that I hear in many guests I have, that you turned a moment where you lost a job that you really loved, and we'll also get back to that. And you actually turned that into an opportunity to get to a place where you actually work on something that's even more in line with your passion. And that's by itself already remarkable. What I find even more remarkable, that you went through really deep suffering in that process, and that it was really hard for you, right? And but you grew out of it stronger. And that's just a true inspiration. And I guess that's also brought you to your full passion to also help others, right? So let's maybe dissect it a little bit. Let's maybe get started with defining a little bit neurodivergence, because also maybe listeners that struggle at work might now wonder, am I maybe a non-diagnosed neurodivergent person? So what is neurodivergence? Let's maybe start there.
Yeah, that's a good point to start. So basically, very simply put, neurodivergence means that the way you think, the way you perceive the world around you, the way you feel or you regulate your feelings, and the way you interact or behave is different what is considered social norm, what is considered typical in a way. And neurodivergence, I have to say, is a term which is social politically was created in a social political context. So it's not a medical definition. Therefore, it still is interpreted differently depending on whom you ask. To me, since I approach it from the nervous system point of view, to me, neurodivergent people are those whose nervous system setting is slightly different from the standard, from what we consider neurotypical or neuronormative, lots of difficult words and terminologies here, which means there is a difference in information processing, sensory intake, attention control, emotional regulation and motor control, and of course also difference on how something is perceived or how learning is possible, performance is actually in the context of comparability to the majority considered different. So that's neurodivergent. And there are conditions which fall under the term, which is ADHD, autistic spectrum disorder, then all of the dyslexia, so the terms dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and I lost the third one, dyspraxia. Sorry,
So can you translate
dyspraxia.
that for normal people?
Oh, yeah,
So dyslexia, I know,
this, right?
it's just to do with
So
reading and writing, right? What are the other
reading and writing. The other this is well, dysfunction, that's where it comes from. So if we look at the brain, there's parts of the brain which are malfunctioning in a way. So they are not working properly, and therefore other brain areas have to jump in and compensate for that, right? This is also the reason, well, we have different capabilities in neurodivergent people, which we'll cover possibly later. So dyslexia, people who have difficulties reading and writing, for instance, are very great in visual thinking or thinking in pictures and narratives and storytelling. Then we have dyscalculia, which is people who have issues with logic and mathematical causality. And then there's dyspraxia, which is more towards coordination. So the body and space, interoception, proprioception, those are the things which are then slightly off. And then we also have, within the umbrella of neurodivergence, we also have Tourette syndrome, for instance. And these are all nervous system variations, which we have from birth throughout the rest of our lives. And that's why I think the definition of neurodivergent fits quite well. Whereas, of course, there are other dysregulations in the nervous system which are inflicted due to either situations or relationships such as trauma-induced dysregulations, or we have patterns such as panic and anxiety disorders, which to me are not under the umbrella of neurodivergence, because if we look at the nervous system in itself, these can be tackled with regulatory interventions, whereas neurodivergence can't be tackled or changed. So no matter how much you try to self-regulate your nervous system, the underlying condition doesn't change.
So
And
that
that's the two
actually has
differences.
quite big impact, right? Because basically you're almost, I mean, to a crazy comparison that just came up, it's almost if you have like a normal car and an electric car. So if your engine works differently, you just have to use the engine the way it works. So you cannot, you have to find adaptation and ways to actually using all the superpowers of it. Because also you mentioned it's, yes, there is a certain dysfunction in one space, but that gives a much better function in other spaces. So it's not just bad, but it's about getting aware of that, right? And then learning how to deal with it.
Yeah, and that, by the way, that's only my way of how I, from my pattern recognition, would phrase that. So I have not any I didn't really look into any medical studies supporting that claim, but to me, it makes quite sense, right? So if we look at how the neurobiology is structured and what comes with that, for instance, let's talk about autistic traits. Okay, so people within the autism spectrum most of the time have issues or difficulties reading social cues. Now, if I can't understand social cues and communication or social norms or subtext and everything, all of the codes which are used because people say something but they don't mean it, if I find that one difficult for me, but I have to survive in a social world, we are all wired for connections, right? So in order to compensate for that, I become very smart in reading patterns. Okay, if this is a situation like that, then people say this. I might have to understand this and learn this for the future. That's just one example, right? Or if your brain has a disconnect in the networks, we have different networks in our brain. Okay, so not to get too technical, the three different networks, and usually networks they alter in activity. Not always are they switched on parallel, which is the case for people with ADHD, which means they have all the time multi-layer of thoughts in their heads. But in order to, make sense of this is what creates this out of the box thinking, because there are no categories which usually people might have. If the default mode network is switched off, which is responsible for creativity and processing, while they, for instance, work on their tax return, so that they can focus, that's not the case for people with ADHD. So they find ways of connecting different topics and different ideas because this brain is constantly switched on. That makes them so creative, or that makes them see possibilities where others might not see them, or they might not be able to understand what we would say risk assessment in a way that no one would ever do this because that's too risky. People with ADHD might not see this because for them in their head, they see a multitude of opportunities on how to make it work. That's why we find many people in the entrepreneurial space, because
I was
everyone else
just
would
thinking
say
about that
no.
because actually now I feel like, maybe you also have a percentage of how many people actually have that, because you said before this is kind of away from the norm, but I feel also more and more people start speaking up. So what is even the norm, right? Because at least more and more really famous entrepreneurs, I'm thinking Elon Musk, I'm thinking Richard Branson, Mel Robbins, there are more and more people that have the visibility that just say, this is, I mean, I have ADHD or whatever they have. And probably that was part of what made them so successful.
Yeah. Yeah, what's the norm, right? And that's a very, very good question to ask. Because when we look towards other cultural setups, if we're looking towards Africa, people who still live very in tune with nature in their tribes, there is also an occurrence of neurodivergence, but is not becoming a problem because those people, they co-regulate, they move, they live attuned with nature, in tune with nature. They have attuned care. So in our society, so the genome or it's called allele in German. So I have to look up what the English word is for that. But the gene expression has been there throughout the years, ever since Neanderthal area. So is that do we say that in English? Neanderthal?
Yeah,
I
I
think
don't
we say
know,
it
but like the
differently.
very first humans, like the
Yeah.
Cro-Magnon, in French, I think it's
Oh.
Cro-Magnon, but that doesn't help either with English.
Oh. But that sounds really nice. How do you say it? Cro-Magnon.
Cro-Magnon.
Mm,
But I'm not sure if that's
beautiful.
actually that exact category. Maybe that's the people before, after. But anyway, like the
Yeah,
very early human beings.
exactly. So it's always has been there. So it's part, that's why people always say it's a natural variation, natural occurrence. And and that's a good question to ask, right? So what is the appropriate norm for us? Well, of course, right now we live in a societal norm which was built by 80% of neurotypical people. And rightfully so, you ask if this is the right form to live. And I would highly try to challenge that, because if we look towards our mental well-being at work, for instance, or also towards university, we do struggle. We see people suffering. So mental well-being if we look at the statistics, is really becoming a problem in the workplace. So over the last 10 years, we had a 90% increase of mental well-being related absence rates at work. It's number two in the absent or sickness leave, and all of the other related ones. Number one is muscle and skeleton issues. Number three is respiratory issues. These are all nervous system dysregulation symptoms. So we do live in a world which we constructed, which is highly toxic for our nervous system. So
And
actually, yeah. So
what also comes up is, in general, we don't, like when you think about if you're really ambitious and you want to have a career, you don't want to be in the 80% norm, right? You want to be in the top 20 or even higher, right? I mean, at
yeah,
least I remember in my previous corporate job, we had even this really, this normal curve, and you really wanted not to be in the normal bit, you wanted to be in the top bit. So now I'm thinking, it's just almost paradoxical that for neurodivergent we want to be in the norm, but maybe, I mean, of course it's hard. I mean, I hear you, it's harder because our world is not adapted, but if the world was better adapted, maybe that could be the superpower, or people that could really help organizations to work better, to invent more things. You know,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So innovation rarely happens within social norms or within the known. That will be counterintuitive, right? But I also like to point out nowadays, it's very important to understand that a room full of Teslas wouldn't have built the Tesla. That's just one thing. What I like to encourage is that we build what I call neurosynergy, so that we understand what is my cognitive profile, how do I work best, what is it that I'm naturally inclined to, and what makes me really good at being who I am in a social context, in a work environment. And then we need to find counterparts. I think this is what neuroinclusion is about for me, is creating a workplace in which A, everyone can thrive, but B, in which we understand the cognitive landscape, and map people together who can then achieve greatness. So neurodivergence in itself can be a competitive edge, but only if we provide the right structures and only if we team them up with the right teams. Because, they have their specific way of thinking, and that makes them good in a variety of things, but really, really bad in loads of other things. So what we need to do is we need to try to either compensate or support, which is called a spiky profile. So we do see in neurodivergence a spiky profile, which is a high amplitude and difference in between cognitive capabilities. So one might be really, really good in, for instance, um, comprehension or data understanding, but then be really, really bad with working memory or communication. And the difference is significant. So sometimes we have what's called an IQ of 150, 160, 170 in one part of the skill set. But then, for instance, we have 70 or 60 or 80 IQ in the other, which is such a big difference that oftentimes you can't really measure an IQ because the difference is too big.
Wow,
But
so the
then,
average is quite average, but actually the
yeah,
peaks are extreme.
exactly. This is why we struggle in normal setups because, for instance, performance management assumes that you have a more or less, let's say, more or less
Balanced.
balanced approach to things. That's the difference between being able and wanting to do something and being not capable of doing something, but understanding what needs doing. But there is the problem of actually doing it, putting it into action, because the spiky profile just doesn't allow for it. And that's very important to understand because we can't measure neurodivergent performance in a balanced manner, because there will be spiky profiles in which they are outstanding, but in others they will need support. And our performance management system in the corporate world and in the school world and in the university is not set up for this. We want to measure, consistently throughout different pillars. And that's just something which neurodivergent people struggle with. That's why they often fail. That's why they are failed by the system. That's why many also high performers or highly gifted people don't manage to go through school okay and then become
In the work you do, because I know
outcasts,
you
or
work also with
they
quite,
find it
big
difficult to
international companies,
find
because,
good
so I
jobs
work in a very
or
international
stable
environment. I have
lives
my
because what
colleagues, they
they
come
have
literally
to
from everywhere in the world.
operate
So I'm
in
quite
is
aware
a
also of cultural
society
differences.
which actually in itself hinders them to take part or perform or even come to any sort of social connectiveness. Belonging is a very, very important pillar in mental well-being. And I have yet to meet a late diagnosed person who says, I feel truly that I belong in the world and I found my place. In my experience with companies as well, neuroinclusion is simple, but it's not easy. And that's just a matter of fact. Because it's simple, because it has simple steps to follow, and the effects are tremendous. But it requires of us to change the way what we are used to.
Mm.
And that's always difficult, isn't it? At the
So
beginning, at least.
So let's get there. I would really like to touch on the simple but not easy ways. But before we get there, could you describe, because I think probably the best stereotyped neurodivergent person that people might know is Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory. And of course, he's completely exaggerated. But sometimes I feel still there's probably some truth in the exaggerated image. So could you maybe describe a bit how it's like for a neurodivergent person? If the listeners might now sitting there like, oh, maybe I'm struggling because I might be neurodivergent. So what makes it so hard? Is it because there's too much noise? Is it because, I don't know, there's not enough structure? So how is it like a work day, and what are the challenges in the work day?
Yeah. I came across a quote or statement which is so funny, and I like to read it back to you because only yesterday I saw it again and this time I saved it. So the quote goes as follows: I'm autistic, which means everyone around me has a disorder that makes them say things they don't mean, not care about structure, fail to hyperfocus on singular important topics, have unreliable memories, drop weird hints, and creepily stare into my eyeballs. And that, I think, sums it up very perfectly. But let's just do a thought experiment here. Okay, just imagine you have to perform, you go to work, you have to perform, right? Because work equals money equals survival. So you have to go to work and you have to perform. So you go into the work, but you are not able to speak the language which people speak. So you don't fit the culture. So whatever you do, it feels like people look at you weirdly. Whatever you say, people seem not to understand what you're saying. So you're often met with weird gazes or a bit of a hesitant respond or something or a question of what you have not said and you didn't hear, but it's somehow made its way into the conversation. And also, just imagine that you sit in the room and it feels like you're constantly being blinded by someone with a flashlight. And they put some speakers left and right and blasting the worst music, which you can imagine. For me, that's, by the way, for me, it's the worst jazz you can have, the worst disorganized jazz. There's good jazz, but there's jazz which just feels chaotic, where you don't, which makes you really agitated in a way. And you constantly try to decipher the social cues because you need to work with those people. So, how do you approach it? You spend a lot of time masking, trying to change the way you interact, trying to translate what is being said, try to self edit what you want to say. And then you have not started working yet. So this is just, getting to the task, getting to the desk, trying to find your way around the workplace in a way. And of course, then when you look towards the actual task at hand, after spending so much time trying to decipher and masking everything or shutting out the noises or the stimuli which are around you, just imagine how much that drains your energy, because that is a constant state of survival. If you put yourself into the situation, there's nothing you can rely on. There's always this fear of saying something wrong or doing something wrong. And that's actually what it feels like. And then what happens as a consequence of this is that you have a very low self-efficacy. You have a very low sense of agency. You have a very low sense of safety, and of course lack of belonging. And that's actually the four pillars which we can notice throughout neurodivergent lives, that they are more or less not existent or non-existent.
Wow, and they're
There
super
is
important. Can you just
Mhm.
repeat them one more time? There was belonging.
Yeah, so there's self-efficacy, sense of agency, sense of safety, and belonging.
Wow. And I'd say for any employee or for any person, those are key, right? So if by default you're already two steps behind because you have to translate the language, I mean, that's just wow.
Yeah, these are these are my four pillars of mental well-being. Another framework I created. I call it NeuroShift now because it's the four pillars which I noticed throughout my years of working with clients, especially clients who suffer from trauma-induced dysregulation in the nervous system, which is, for instance, OCD and panic disorders. And I see that in all of the other people as well. So to me, that's the blueprint. And center stage takes the level of self-regulation.
So let's get back to the teams and the
Yeah.
inclusive teams. So what are the simple ways that if there are leaders or managers listening, what could they do to include neurodivergent people better? And how could they, for instance, set up these teams that get the best out of all people, right?
Mm. So let me just set a framework so that it's a bit more clear what neuroinclusion really means. So you said there's a lot of diversity and inclusion, and yeah, that's why I think let's focus on the common denominator again. So let's focus on the nervous system. And if we focus on the nervous system and neuroinclusion, that is, we have 4 pillars we can look at. We can look at the organization as a system. So we have the processes and policies and frameworks, but also the workplace design. So really hard infrastructure as well. Then we have leadership, which is the biggest lever, because when we look at mental well-being, then leaders actually have the most impact on mental well-being. 69% of employees worldwide say their leaders have the biggest influence on their mental well-being. And within leadership, there is possibilities to have leadership principles, to have meeting structures, which are set up in a specific way, which are very effective. We have ways of talking clear and effective without social norms or communication. There is a way to manage performance. There are ways to give feedback. And also within the one-to-one leadership, there are many tools which we can use to be more neuro-inclusive. And then there's the team, so the third pillar, where we talk about the cognitive team mapping, but also what I like to call the team playbook. So rules on how we work together, how we give feedback, who is my synergy partner, so with whom do I collaborate best, because our profiles match perfectly and we can create synergies, but who's also the person with whom I have a lot of different ways of perceiving the world, so there might be more conflict involved, which when we steer it, can be really productive as well. But we need to understand that, what are the people I work best with, because our profiles align, and what are the contradicting profiles, and how can we make use of this so that we don't end up head to head and in difficult situations. So we need to elaborate and find ways of how we communicate with each other. When do we use direct language? And when don't we use direct language? And what does this mean for the team? So these are things on the team level which pay into psychological safety a lot as well. And then there is the individual, so the fourth pillar. So the individual, how does the individual work best? So what's the cognitive profile of this person? How do I work best? What do I need? Do I need additional support? So do we offer, for instance, a software? There's softwares for dyslexia, text to speech, speech to text. Do we have AI summary, for instance, for people who have ADHD? Switch it on and then immediately the nervous system calms down because, there's a system which will summarize the most important points. So the 4 pillars are important. And for each pillar, there's, of course, tools, systems, and structures which we can tackle. And that depends on the company environment, policies, if they have a works council or not. So that's why I like to focus on leadership to begin with, because within your leadership, you can set up effective meetings, give better feedback, you can have a better way of understanding your team cognitive profiles, can map them together, you can create your own playbooks. So by the way, I also created a playbook for neuroinclusion. So someone who now thinks, hey, I want to take that and get more inspiration of formats which I can implement along the way, which will give me the highest impact in my area, they can check that one out. So it's a
So
toolbox
you
which you
have
can
that in
use.
German and English, I would think.
I have that in German. Good
Okay.
point. I have that in German. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure with like ChatGPT soon. Let's.
Maybe I
But
can translate it. Yeah.
no, in any case, I'm happy to include it in the episode or any other
Mhm.
references that could be useful. And Germany is still like over with, if you add Austria and Switzerland, we're still talking like 100 million people. So, let's
Yeah.
start there.
Let's start there. Exactly. So I would say check that one out because it gives you also variety within your leadership. It gives you some experimental ideas of piloting some projects in your company, but it also gives a lot of variety around awareness and formats which you can easily implement into your workplace if, for instance, you want to look at process and structures within the workplace. So there are many things which can be done which have immediate effect. But in order to answer your question, so what can everyone do Okay, so actually, let's look at maybe 4 micro rules which you can apply, or which anyone can apply, because I guess your listeners, they're leaders, they're employees, they're teammates. So just to give them something. So the first one is ask instead of assume. I think this is something which helps a lot. Why does this matter? We have different nervous system settings, we have different norms. Everyone experiences the world in a different way. So rather have a question, ask people instead of assuming that we all have the same perception. Never assume sameness. Always ask, what do you need to be at your best? How can I help you with this? How did you perceive this situation? These are simple questions, but they can make all the difference.
And I think that's just generally good advice. Because I
Yeah,
remember one of my leaders recommended me early in my career, to when you have a new boss, to always kind of ask, how would you like to like even communicate? Do you want to get an email? Do you for the same reason, don't assume your way is the other person's way. So I think that's in any case, great advice. Cool. Second.
exactly. Yeah. So, and I love that you already pointed out a very important thing. So these things, these rules, they are applicable for everyone. So within my workshops, every workshop I give, depending on the audience I talk to, they always come back and say, "Oh, but this is something I can use for everyone." I said, "Yes, that's what neuroinclusion is about, providing something which works for everyone. So we only have to do one thing, but it works for everyone. So make it easy. It doesn't need to be difficult." So the second one I think is really good also to remember: share instead of expect.
Mm.
Okay, so don't say you have to do it so that it looks good. Say, here's what good looks like. Or the deadline is how I want to, this is the deadline I want to give you, and this is how I want to receive it. You know, when you work in corporations, people always think, but this was clear. Really? So did you tell them when, what, how, why, in what form? No. Well, share instead of expect. Be
Mm.
really clear. And also never assume again that someone knows what you mean by saying certain things. I like to always emphasize, especially in leadership, when you talk to your employee and you go through a brief, let them summarize at the end what they need to do and what's their next step. Well, then you will understand where maybe the realities might differ, and then you can clarify. And then we talked about this as well: observe before interpretation. So, observation before interpretation. I noticed a long pause.
Mm.
I've seen that you interrupted. Not. I've seen that you had a lot of things to say while others were talking, instead of I've seen you interrupting people. So that's important. Or I've noticed that for the last 3 meetings, you were not here in time. Can you help me understand what happened? And then that makes it a base, ground, or a foundation to actually be curious and ask, how did you observe this? How is your reality looking like? This is what I have seen. What did you notice? So that, gives a level of, or enables us to have better conversations and be also curious about the other's perception. And then I think overall, just remember that together rather than against each other. Oftentimes, and it's also the nervous system at play here. If we see someone acting weird, then our nervous system doesn't know how to categorize this. So it's fight, flight, because
Mm.
the other one is safe and social. So if I don't know who you are and what you're doing, then I can't be safe and social because I don't know what's happening. So I'm automatically switching into fight or flight. And then fight or flight makes me a bit more hyper vigilant. So you're not you're either my friend or you're my enemy, so to speak, very simply put. And if we keep that in mind, that the others are not our enemies, they're just different. And we work best together because we are wired for connection. And at the workplace, we need to collaborate. So let's just see, how can we work best together? what is it that I need, but what is it that we need? And how do we make that one work? And that means also we need to compromise. Every one of us needs to compromise. But there are certain aspects where people can't compromise. And then we have to find ways on how to make that work. So
I
that
like
would be
that
something.
too. So I'm also in a trained on a system coaching approach, and there they have quite a nice framework that connects a bit with what you just said. They call it the third entity. So it's basically you have you have me. It's what you need, what I need, but then there's also what the third entity needs. And the third entity could be our relationship, could be our organization, it could be our team. And that sometimes helps them to, when you start thinking about that, that could be sometimes a way to bring both our priorities together.
I love that. I love that because that's also something I get often asked at work. How much is too much? How much do we have to put individual welfare above the collective need? And I said, not at all. We need to find common ground. We don't need to find exceptions. We need to change what needs changing and then provide it for everyone. That's why I differ a little bit in this D, E, I, and B discussion, because to me, it's not about finding ways how to integrate 20% of the society. I think we need to look at things which work for 100% of the society. And of course, there will always be adjustments. And that depends on your level of freedom which you have in your organization. I mean, we can paint the perfect ideal world if you have all the means to do that. Most of the companies don't. Most of the companies have very rigid frameworks and no budget whatsoever. So we need to have a look, okay, what can we do here and now, and what are the little things which we can change? That's why most of the time, like those three principles in the overall framework of together rather than against each other, or third entity, which I really like what you said, helps a lot in our day to day. But of course, what we should try to look at as a next step is really how do we communicate? How do we work effectively in meetings? I've seen meeting setups which are terrible. I don't even know how that works, okay? Where role is unclear, where no one knows what the other is doing, where the brief isn't really clear. And why don't we have this? Because it takes extra effort. Working efficiently takes effort. It takes framework. Leaders don't have time. I don't have time to do this. Well, there's the saying in German: if you pay it cheap, you pay double, something like that. And it's the same in managers' perspective. Well, if you want to be a good manager, that requires something of you. It requires effort.
Yeah, there's one really famous, I don't even know what he is, like work guru, Stephen Cohen. He has like the 7 principles, and one of them, it's the 7th or it's the 8th even. It's like sharpen your sword. And it's kind of a similar idea. If you just keep on cutting because you don't have time to sharpen your sword, ultimately it'll be harder and take longer. So yes, making those investments. So this is amazing, and I could go on forever. So before we move to the quick fire burst questions, I was wondering, because we already touched a bit on you have so many ideas and so many frameworks. So if I'd give you a magic wand and you could design something that is, maybe not complete utopia because that's unrealistic, but if there's something you could realistically make happen next year for organizations, for people, what would it be? What would be perfect if organizations could at least just do that? And you already have the 3 principles. That'd be already great. Is there anything else that would be amazing if they could implement that?
Yeah,
Just that next year.
yeah. If it's just one thing, then it's core regulation. So we possibly won't have the time to elaborate on this, but the whole world would be not only a better place, we would have less mental and physical disorders if any person who is responsible for human beings, teachers, leaders, kindergarteners, psychiatrists, were properly educated in co-regulation.
So
So
we'll make the time. I want to learn more. Let's make a bit more time. But so correlate is basically that they take the accountability to help the other to regulate.
yeah, so that's nervous system regulation by proxy. So let's just elaborate a bit on nervous system regulation and co-regulation. So when you're a little kid, you can't regulate your nervous system on your own. Your mother needs to co-regulate you. Imagine a baby crying. Your mother needs to soothe the baby. And it does this it does it by paying attuned care, applying attuned care, sorry, by soothing, by calming their voice, by calming them, by calming themselves. And that will affect the baby. And later, when we get older, we need to learn how to regulate our emotions. We don't know what emotions are. We don't have the concept of contextualizing situations because we don't have the brain development yet. So if we lose something, our sweet or whatever, then it's the worst thing. Our toy is gone. We don't have the context of it's just a toy, because this doesn't exist. So we need our parents to help us regulate the emotions, understand what's going on in our bodies and our heads, and help us to calm down. And we do that together. Through the other's nervous system, we learn how to regulate our own nervous system. And it's a lot about moving with the body, using breath work, helping to understand what's going on, and finding ways where the body can find its way back into safe and social after fight and flight. And this should be applicable also to kindergarten, because kids are not yet fully able to regulate themselves. So understanding, working with fight and flight situations. So if a kid acts out, then it doesn't help to say, you have to stop this. It has to understand, okay, this is now a bad situation. How do I deal with this energy? How can I find my way back? And this is only through co-regulation. And in the workplace as well. So if there's a stressful situation, and if you're stressed as a leader, you will enter a room, and your nervous system, we are all connected through neuroception, your nervous system will join you. Your nervous system is always with you. So if you go in and you are nervous and you are angry and you are out of control, your team will notice this as well. So you need to be able to calm yourself down, and therefore automatically your team will be more calmer. That's just the day-to-day basis. Of course, there are tools. There are tools to help someone calm down or find their way back to the window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is where we all are able to tackle challenges in our lives and return back to a safe and social state. But there are people which are in a permanent functional freeze, so they're outside of the window of tolerance, or there are people who really struggle to return. And we can do that through co-regulation, and especially neurodivergent people need that more, because their nervous system is per default hypervigilant or more hypervigilant, so their window of tolerance is smaller. So we need to help them regulate themselves. And this is a lot through finding stimmings together, or incorporating breaks where the nervous system can come down, or offering additional processing time, or finding ways of having some quiet spaces in the office versus some loud spaces where others can chat and talk. This is a default and infrastructure for nervous systems to enable them to regulate themselves. But in the direct leadership, in the education of kids and children, and in kindergartens, we need to do way more to actively co-regulate kids.
I really like that. And I want to co-regulate better. So I've gotten really a lot into mindfulness over the last year or so. And I also did a really interesting training on flow, like the concept of the state of flow, and it's linked with meditation mindfulness. So that could be part of that, or what's the connection? So if I'm better in calming myself down and I'm more, relaxed as a leader or also as a team member, so I guess that already helps. But to get one step further to co-regulate, so how would I want to learn? Where do I go? How do I start?
You come to me. we do a training. We do a training on co-regulation. Yeah, where do you start? So when we talk leadership, how do I start leadership competence training for co-regulation. We start by understanding the nervous system. What is the window of tolerance? What's hyperarousal and hypoarousal? And how does this show up in stress patterns? There are certain stress patterns which we need to understand. So if we can observe them, we have the proper tools to help co-regulate those stress patterns. Stress patterns are hyperfixation or hyperfocus is a stress pattern as well. It's often called a superpower when in fact it's also dysregulation. So it costs a lot of resources. So hyperfocus, procrastination, paralysis, overload, shutdown, meltdown. So these are stress patterns which we understand and which everyone has, but of course in neurodivergence they are more what's the word? I just had the word
Common
and now
or
no, not
um,
common. They are more profound. There we
ah.
have it. More profound. Sorry. I saw the word, I'm slightly dyslexic. So I saw the word and it flew out of my visual. Yeah, was gone. So yeah, so therefore we need to understand there are cues, there are observable behaviors, and now they learn tools on how to bring them back either into action, procrastination, paralysis, or they help to soothe in overload, shut down, and they help to just hold that space in meltdowns. And this is very practical oriented. So
Mm.
they will learn tools on how to make that happen and use it in the various situations. And with children and adults as well. So adults, usually when an adult comes to me, I use my mental well-being compass, which we describe with the 4 pillars. We look at self-regulation and their stress patterns, and then they will learn how to co-regulate in a day-to-day in the framework of the mental well-being compass, but as well in stressful situations. And it helps in relationships as well. It's necessary in relationships for neurodivergent people. Also, siblings, for instance, my sister and I co-regulate on a regular basis. There are also loads of tools which leaders should learn, such as body doubling and accountability partner, and not eat the frog, but eat the elephant, skip the frog, and stuff like this, because eat the frog won't work for neurodivergence. So there is a particular tool set, and this is where we start.
Wow, now I'm intrigued. So, do you have any more? Is there anything I could include in the notes of this episode on co-regulation? If there's anything, I'd be more than happy to, because I find that fascinating, and I'm sure some
Yeah.
of the listeners might want to learn more too.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I started, but it's in German. I started a podcast, Neuro Leadership, which is around co-regulation and neuro-inclusive leadership tools. It's very short episodes, 14 minutes, 20 minutes, snackable content, and I might add some deep dives, which are longer episodes around that. So that's what I'm just started actually 2 weeks ago. Yeah,
Excellent.
and
So we'll
then
include that. And, let's start with the German speakers. And whoever
yeah.
is not a German speaker, we apologize. No, actually, we never apologize. No, but just get out there and Google. I'm sure there's also, once you have an idea, there's stuff, you can find what you need to know these days. So I'm sure there's
You
also content in English.
can. Yes. I mean, there's more content in English around co-regulation for sure, because we don't have that in German. But I don't know if it's in leadership. I
Hmm.
think again, I'm a thought leader in this matter. People always come to me telling me, Xenia, you're too early. People will not yet understand what you're talking about. I said, yeah, but what do you want me to do? What do you
So
want me to
if
do?
there is a leader out there who's listening to that and is curious, well, reach out to Xenia and maybe they can hire you to make it into English or start developing on I don't know, run a specific training in English and then you develop it one step at a time. And at one point, you'll have everything also in English.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I do, by the way, I do offer my trainings in English as well. But yeah, so if someone is interested, do reach out to me or Google co-regulation in general and then apply that. But in order to have the proper tools, I think you need to work with an expert. I always say that also to companies who want to start something in neuroinclusion, work with experts. Because, it's similar to finding a system for someone who has never been in the system. So there's biases, there's unwritten rules, there's something which you are not even aware of. There is this saying, nothing about us without us, in the context of neuroinclusion. So the shout out would be, if you want to do something within your company, buy my playbook and then work with people in your company, or work with me, or work with someone whom you
Really gets
find.
it.
Yeah, and who also, that's the beauty of neuroinclusion experts. You can find the person where you think, the values align with this approach, and I want to have that particular person. And that's the beauty of having those experts in this field.
So thanks so much. This was so deep, and there was so much knowledge in there. And I recapped the 3 rules and all the key takeaways so people can keep it top of their mind. So let's move to our little challenge, the quick fire burst questions. You know the drill.
Yes.
7 questions, 1 word. Well, you might take me literal and you have 1 word, but most people struggle. So let's try if you can answer them with 1 word. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Cool. What is 1 belief you had to drop to live your way?
That I am the problem.
A place that cracked something open in you.
In a negative way, the world we live in. In a positive way, mountains always.
Oh, yeah, I come with you. 1 thing you had to unlearn.
Being who I am and express myself the way I naturally would. I had to unlearn that throughout my life. I'm starting to relearn it now.
Oh, nice. I mean, good that you learned it, that you ready to do it now. You're non-negotiable right now.
2 things: climbing, cold plunging.
Oh, sports. Good. The boldest risk that paid off.
It has yet to pay off.
What is it, the risk?
Stepping out there and challenging the society.
Nice.
Hmm.
1 word for your leadership or your life in this chapter.
Nervous system led.
Ah, nice. Yeah, that's super important. And the ripple you hope your story creates.
I think I said it initially, I guess I did, is to change the way we think about work, leadership, and mental well-being.
Nice. That'd be hopefully a ripple that becomes a wave.
I hope so too. I hope so too. Well, it's that's actually something where everyone can take responsibility in. So it's not a single woman show, as a matter of fact.
It will be a movement. I join you
It
in that
is.
movement.
Yeah.
In a different, I attack it from a different side with a different theme.
Love it.
Exactly.
Love it.
So thanks so much for playing along with that. That's always fun. And it's really hard.
My pleasure.
I did it myself, the quickfire burst question. I struggled to do 1 word. So to wrap it up, if somebody's listening out there and he's ready to wander off the beaten track or ready to play more by their rules, what's like 1 small step you could encourage them to do?
Yeah, I think the step is turning inwards, really asking yourself, who am I when I don't need to be anyone? What do I like doing if it's not measured by performance or no one is watching?
I love that. It's so important. And it's so simple. As I said before, many things are so simple, but they're never easy. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good one. Yeah.
Let's start there. Cool. Thanks so much. This was a true pleasure. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. It was really great. Thank you for the lovely conversation and the energy.
Wonderful. Bye for now.
Bye.
That's it for today. If this stirred something in you, don't just sit on it. Do something, anything, today, right now. Take 1 small intentional step toward more freedom, flow, and fun. And see where the ride takes you. If this hit home, follow the show, share it with a friend, or leave a review. That's how we ripple this energy further. Want to go deeper? Head over to mindset/mastery.ch for coaching, tools, and next steps. Until next time, trust your gut, stay curious, and keep playing it by your rules. Bye for now.